Karim Al-Mansour, the young Saudi billionaire with a spotless reputation, and Isabella Rossi, the mysterious European beauty who seemed too perfect to be true, looked like the world's most enviable couple, until their fairy tale wedding night ended in blood, betrayal, and a shocking death that exposed secrets no one saw coming. The Crime Scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. The wedding was nothing short of legendary, the kind of event that paparazzi dream of and socialites scramble to attend. Every corner of the massive ballroom sparkled with gold-plated decor, crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and roses flown in from 3 different countries. Guests arrived in chauffeured Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, their designer gowns and tailored suits creating a scene straight out of a glossy fashion magazine. At the center of it all stood the Saudi billionaire, young and dashing, commanding attention with the quiet confidence that only extreme wealth can buy. His bride was a vision in white, her gown encrusted with diamonds that shimmered under the spotlight. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing her flawless smile and the way she clung to his arm like she was born for this life. On the surface, it was pure perfection. The union of 2 worlds, his rooted in tradition, power, and unimaginable riches, hers cloaked in mystery and breathtaking beauty. Rumors had swirled for weeks leading up to the big day, with the press speculating about how she had captured the heart of one of the region's most sought-after bachelors. To the outside world, she was simply enchanting, a woman who had walked into his life like fate itself had drawn them together. The celebration unfolded like a dream sequence. International pop stars performed live, champagne flowed like rivers, and fireworks lit up the night sky, exploding in patterns that spelled out their names. Every detail was meticulously planned to project grandeur, the kind of spectacle that would cement the couple as the new power pair of the century. Yet beneath the layers of glitter and fairy tale charm, there was a sense of unease. Guests whispered when they thought no one was listening, questioning how little anyone actually knew about the woman in the spotlight. She had no long trail of society friends, no old money ties, no visible family to stand beside her. Behind the glowing smile and polished charm, the bride carried a past she had worked tirelessly to erase. Long before she wore a diamond-studded gown and stepped into the billionaire's world, she lived a life riddled with bad decisions and dangerous company. In her younger years, she moved through circles where money came fast and loyalty was always bought. She'd been involved with men who thrived on hustling, black market deals, and shady backroom arrangements. Those who knew her back then remembered a woman who could manipulate a room with a glance, but often found herself tangled in webs she couldn't fully control. She reinvented herself piece by piece. New hair, new wardrobe, new social circles, all designed to bury the person she used to be. In a different city, she started introducing herself as someone untouchable, presenting a polished exterior that screamed sophistication. She scrubbed her name from past records, leaned on favors from powerful acquaintances, and crafted the perfect image of elegance. To the high society crowd, she was a mystery, a woman who appeared suddenly but seemed born to belong. For her, it was the ultimate performance, and she played it flawlessly. But skeletons don't stay buried forever. Old lovers whispered about her sudden disappearance. Former friends remembered favors left unpaid and dangerous connections she had walked away from. The whispers had not yet reached the ears of the billionaire before the wedding, but they were circling closer, waiting for the right moment. Her past wasn't just messy, it was explosive. In that dazzling ballroom, none of it showed. She floated from guest to guest, winning admiration with her charm, as though nothing in her life had ever been out of place. But beneath the diamonds and rehearsed laughter, there was fear, a gnawing awareness that the past she had outrun for years was only a step behind. And if it caught her now, in this new world of riches and power, the fall would be catastrophic. The groom had built his empire on intuition, and that same sharp instinct began tugging at him in the weeks leading up to the wedding. At first, he brushed it off as nerves. After all, even billionaires aren't immune to doubt before such a monumental commitment. But the whispers started surfacing in conversations he couldn't ignore. Friends who had once praised his new bride's beauty now spoke in careful tones, dropping hints that her story didn't quite add up. Associates he trusted made subtle comments about her background, suggesting she carried more than just mystery in her past. The more he listened, the more cracks he noticed. Small details about her life before meeting him never matched up. She avoided conversations about her family, sidestepped questions about old friends, and kept her answers vague whenever anyone tried to connect the dots. What had once felt alluring now seemed like a red flag waving in front of him. He began pulling strings behind the scenes, sending private investigators to dig into her history, determined to learn what lay beneath the flawless exterior. The reports that came back were like shards of glass cutting into his pride. They painted a picture of a woman who had been reckless, entangled with men who thrived in illegal trades, and rumored to have walked away from scandals that could have ruined anyone less cunning. There were whispers of affairs, debts, and a reputation she had managed to bury by starting over. For a man of his stature, the thought of being deceived was intolerable. By the time the wedding night arrived, suspicion had festered into fury. Sitting across from her in the grand suite, his mind was a storm of betrayal. The woman the world celebrated as his perfect bride now seemed like a con artist who had infiltrated his carefully guarded life. The fairy tale was crumbling, and in his eyes, she had orchestrated the entire illusion. The luxury suite was designed for romance. Velvet drapes, champagne chilling in crystal buckets, rose petals scattered across silk sheets. Yet the atmosphere was anything but tender. The billionaire's suspicions had reached a breaking point, and the silence between him and his bride was heavy enough to suffocate. Hours earlier, they had been paraded before flashing cameras as the picture of happiness, but now they sat on opposite sides of the room, tension crackling like static in the air. He couldn't ignore the gnawing thoughts in his head any longer. The glamour of the day dissolved into raw anger as he confronted her with everything he had uncovered. In that moment, pride became his greatest enemy. To him, the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public. The idea that he, with his empire, his name, his reputation, could be fooled by a woman who had rewritten her own history cut deeper than any wound. Each unanswered question, every vague detail she had dodged, now felt like proof that she had deceived him from the start. The confrontation spiraled quickly, words sharpened into accusations, and accusations twisted into rage. The bride tried to maintain composure, but beneath her polished facade, panic flickered. She had worked too hard to build this new identity, and watching it collapse on the very night it was meant to be solidified was unbearable. The more she attempted to deflect, the more it fueled his fury. What happened next shattered the fairy tale beyond repair. His anger boiled over, and the suite transformed into a scene of chaos. The laughter and applause from the wedding still echoed faintly through the walls of the hotel, but inside that room, violence replaced celebration. The night that should have marked the beginning of a lifelong bond descended into tragedy, leaving behind broken glass, bruised skin, and the chilling realization that love had curdled into something unrecognizable. The fairy tale ending everyone had imagined never stood a chance. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of the honeymoon suite, but the scene inside was far from serene. The hotel staff knocked softly at first, carrying trays of breakfast and fresh flowers, expecting to be greeted by a glowing newlywed couple. When there was no response, they assumed the pair wanted privacy after a long night of celebration. Hours passed, and still no sign of the bride or groom. Concern turned into unease when calls to the suite went unanswered, and the staff finally sent security to investigate. The door opened to a silence that felt unnatural. The smell of spilled champagne and smoke from half-burned candles lingered in the air. On the bed, the bride lay motionless, her once glamorous appearance destroyed by bruises that told a horrifying story. The diamond necklace she had worn hours earlier now looked like a cruel contrast against her battered skin. Sheets stained with both wine and blood clung to her lifeless body. For a moment, the staff froze, unable to process the nightmare unfolding before them. Sitting nearby was the billionaire, silent and distant, his shirt wrinkled and smeared, his hands trembling as though the weight of the world pressed down on them. The arrogance and confidence he had displayed at the wedding were gone, replaced by a hollow stare that made the room feel even colder. Word spread quickly through the hotel. Guests whispered in the hallways, and within minutes, cameras and reporters swarmed outside the gates. The story was too shocking to keep contained. A bride dead on her wedding night, and her powerful husband found at the scene. The fairy tale wedding had turned into a tabloid tragedy overnight, sparking outrage, curiosity, and disbelief around the world. What was supposed to be the start of a glamorous future had instead become the most scandalous and chilling headline of the decade. Police flooded the hotel within the hour, their flashing lights cutting through the glamorous facade of the luxury resort. Forensics teams worked swiftly, photographing every corner of the suite, collecting fibers, fingerprints, and anything that could piece together the events of the night. The bride's body was carefully moved, covered from the public eye, but whispers of her condition had already spread beyond the walls. Investigators immediately zeroed in on the groom, whose powerful name was as much a shield as it was a target. His wealth and status complicated everything. This was no ordinary crime scene, and everyone knew it. The groom's demeanor only fueled speculation. Some officers described him as eerily calm, while others noted his vacant expression, like a man consumed by regret or shock. Still, the evidence in the room spoke louder than words. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and signs of a violent struggle painted a clear picture of chaos. To outsiders, it looked like an open and shut case, a husband whose temper had turned deadly. Yet cracks in the narrative began to appear almost immediately. Surveillance footage from the hotel mysteriously went missing. Witnesses who claimed to have heard shouting grew hesitant to come forward. Rumors circulated that someone higher up was pulling strings, ensuring certain details were buried. Lawyers arrived in droves, crafting statements that framed the groom as devastated, not guilty. But then came another twist. Information surfaced about the bride's past, her shady connections, debts, and unresolved entanglements. Some investigators wondered if her death had less to do with marital rage and more to do with enemies she had left behind. Could someone else have slipped into that suite? Could the groom have been set up, his explosive anger used to disguise a more calculated crime? The investigation dragged on, tangled in layers of power, secrecy, and scandal. As investigators dug deeper, the fairy tale unraveled into something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. What initially seemed like a husband's violent outburst on a wedding night began to resemble a carefully staged trap. Confidential sources leaked documents linking the bride to a network of criminals she had supposedly left behind years ago. Old associates whispered that she had debts she could never repay, and marrying into billions might have been her only escape plan. But in the underworld she once moved through, escape was never that simple. The theory gained traction that someone had followed her into this new life, waiting for the right moment to strike. If true, the billionaire wasn't just a suspect. He was the perfect scapegoat. His reputation for pride and quick temper made him an easy target for blame, especially when the crime scene pointed directly at him. But the missing surveillance footage and conflicting witness statements painted a murkier picture. There were moments where the timeline didn't match up, and certain details suggested another hand had been at work inside that suite. Meanwhile, the media circus spiraled out of control. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, and bloodshed, turning the tragedy into global entertainment. The groom's empire wavered as investors grew nervous, allies distanced themselves, and the weight of suspicion pressed harder with each passing day. Behind the walls of his mansion, he fought not only for his freedom but for his legacy, desperate to prove he had been manipulated by forces far bigger than his own fury. Yet justice remained elusive. Some believed he was guilty, consumed by jealousy and rage. Others were convinced the bride's past had finally caught up to her, and that her death had been inevitable, no matter who she married. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, cover-ups, and secrets.